Psalm 3. Psalm 3 opens with David's heartfelt plea to God during a time of personal crisis. He is surrounded by enemies, including his own son, Absalom, who has rebelled against him. In this moment of distress, David turns to God, acknowledging him as his shield and salvation. Despite the perilous circumstances, he expresses unwavering trust in God's ability to protect and deliver him. The psalm serves as a reminder of the comfort and refuge that can be found in God during our most challenging moments. Psalm 4. Continuing in a similar vein, Psalm 4 is a prayer of David seeking God's righteous judgment and guidance. He addresses those who question his faith and loyalty to God. David emphasizes the importance of trusting God's goodness and righteousness, even when confronted with adversity and deceit. It encourages us to maintain our faith and integrity in the face of skepticism and opposition. Psalm 5. In Psalm 5, David implores God to hear his prayers and considers him as the source of refuge for the righteous. He acknowledges God's hatred for wickedness and his own reliance on God's righteousness. The psalm reflects a desire for divine guidance in navigating life's challenges and emphasizes that the righteous can find safety and peace in God's presence. Psalm 6. Psalm 6 is a poignant expression of repentance and a plea for God's mercy. David is overwhelmed by physical and emotional anguish, and he turns to God with a broken heart. He seeks healing and forgiveness, recognizing his need for God's compassion. This psalm resonates with anyone who has experienced deep remorse and longed for God's gracious forgiveness and restoration. Psalm 7. In Psalm 7, David addresses the unjust accusations of his enemies and seeks God's judgment. He appeals to God's righteous character, confident that the Lord will vindicate him. This psalm serves as a reminder of God's role as a just judge who protects the innocent and holds the guilty accountable. Psalm 8. Psalm 8 is a hymn of praise that reflects on the majesty of God's creation. David marvels at the vastness of the universe and recognizes humanity's special place in it. He acknowledges God's glory and the authority given to humans over creation. This psalm inspires awe and gratitude for God's magnificent handiwork. Psalm 9. Psalm 9 reflects on God's righteous judgment and portrays him as a refuge for the oppressed. David praises God for his deeds and deliverance. He encourages us to remember God's justice and mercy in the face of adversity, reminding us that he is a source of strength and security. Psalm 10. Psalm 10 addresses the existence of evil and the suffering of the oppressed. David questions why God seems distant in the face of injustice and cruelty. He calls on God to intervene on behalf of the vulnerable and oppressed. This psalm prompts reflection on the role of faith and trust in God during times of suffering and injustice. Psalm 11. In Psalm 11, David reaffirms his trust in the Lord as a righteous judge and refuge during times of chaos and danger. He confronts the advice to flee to the mountains and instead chooses to trust in God's providence. This psalm encourages us to stand firm in our faith, even when facing challenging circumstances. Psalm 12. Psalm 12 laments the prevalence of deception and the rarity of faithful and honest people. David contrasts the words of the wicked with the pure words of the Lord, emphasizing God's promise to protect the oppressed. This psalm offers solace and reassurance to those who seek God's truth and refuge in a world filled with deceit. Psalm 13. Psalm 13 is a heartfelt cry to God during a period of despair. David pleads for God to consider his plight and asks how long he must endure suffering. The psalm beautifully captures the emotional turmoil of feeling abandoned by God. However, it concludes with a declaration of trust and rejoicing in God's salvation. Psalm 14. Psalm 14 addresses human folly and the need for God's intervention. David declares that the fool says in his heart that there is no God and highlights the moral decay caused by such unbelief. The psalm points to the importance of acknowledging God's existence and seeking his guidance in life. Psalm 15. This psalm describes the characteristics of those who can dwell in God's presence. David outlines qualities such as integrity, truthfulness, and justice. It serves as a guide for living a righteous life and emphasizes the importance of ethical conduct. Psalm 16. Psalm 16 celebrates God as the source of security and joy. David expresses his dependence on God and rejects idolatry. He finds his inheritance, refuge, and joy in the Lord. This psalm invites us to find our true fulfillment in God rather than material possessions or false idols. Psalm 17. In Psalm 17, David seeks divine protection against his enemies. He appeals to God's righteousness and prays for deliverance from those who seek to harm him. This psalm illustrates the trust one can place in God when facing adversaries and difficult circumstances. Psalm 18. Psalm 18 is an extensive hymn of praise to God as a deliverer from danger. David vividly describes God's power and faithfulness in rescuing him from his enemies. The psalm emphasizes the strength and protection that come from trusting in God, making it an inspiring declaration of God's goodness. Psalm 19. This psalm extols God's creation and His Word as sources of wisdom and guidance. David reflects on the glory of the heavens and the perfection of God's law. It encourages us to appreciate both the natural world and God's written revelation as avenues for understanding His greatness. Psalm 20. Psalm 20 is a prayer for the king's success in battle. David recognizes that true victory comes from God and seeks divine favor and protection. It highlights the importance of turning to God for guidance and strength in times of conflict. Psalm 21. Continuing the theme of victory, Psalm 21 acknowledges God's blessings and protection of the king. David attributes his successes to God's goodness and expresses confidence in God's continued support. This psalm serves as a reminder of the importance of gratitude and humility in times of prosperity. Psalm 22. Psalm 22 is a remarkable messianic psalm that combines lament and hope. It foreshadows the suffering and ultimate victory of Christ on the cross. David's words, my God, why have you forsaken me?" echo the very words Jesus spoke on the cross. This psalm is a profound reflection on the redemptive work of Christ. Psalm 23. Psalm 23 is perhaps one of the most beloved passages in the entire Bible. It depicts God as a loving shepherd who provides, guides, and comforts his people. David's portrayal of God as the shepherd who leads us beside still waters and restores our souls offers deep comfort and assurance of God's care. Psalm 24. Psalm 24 focuses on God's sovereignty over creation and underscores the call for holiness. David asks who can ascend to God's holy hill, emphasizing the importance of clean hands and a pure heart. It encourages us to approach God with reverence and purity. Psalm 25. In Psalm 25, David expresses trust in God's guidance and mercy. He seeks forgiveness for his sins and protection from his enemies. This psalm serves as a model of humility and dependence on God, highlighting the importance of seeking God's ways. Psalm 26. Psalm 26 reflects on the psalmist's integrity and desire to dwell in God's presence. David appeals to God to vindicate him and to examine his heart. It demonstrates the psalmist's commitment to righteous living and invites us to assess our own faithfulness. Psalm 27. Finally, Psalm 27 is a profound expression of trust and faith. David declares God as his light, salvation, and refuge, even in the midst of adversity and enemies. The psalm illustrates the unwavering confidence one can have in God's protection and guidance. These detailed summaries provide viewers with a deeper understanding of the themes, emotions, and messages conveyed in each of Psalms 3 to 27, enriching their appreciation of these timeless and spiritually significant passages.